would love to talk about MIDI 2.0 and how it is the future of music technology. Now, what is MIDI? Pretty much, MIDI is a musical instrument digital interface, or pretty much the language that is used to communicate between an electronic keyboard or any sort of electronic instrument and the actual production software, usually on some sort of computer. Now, this MIDI communication, it comes carrying two pieces of information, pretty much. It carries what note is being played on the piano or any sort of MIDI instrument, and the velocity that key is being pressed. And now, these are two very important pieces of information, simply because if you are to have an actual piano and you play the note hard, it's going to sound different than when you play it soft. So MIDI tries its best in order to kind of incorporate that into its programming and allow for different values in order for the instrument to be more replicated in a humanic way, as opposed to just in a robotic digital manner. Now, I'd also love to talk about the history of MIDI and kind of what that is going to say for the future. Now, this may come as a surprise, but we are still using MIDI 1.0, and it was made almost 40 years ago. And that is frankly very surprising to me. It is still using that same kind of information transfer, but it's very well made. Pretty much the backstory behind MIDI is that all of the music software and production companies all came together, and they said that we want to make sure that we use the same program so that it's easier for their products to be sold, and that its software is more integrated more easily with their products. So they created MIDI, or MIDI 1.0, and that was back in the 80s. And technology has gone a long way since then. But MIDI is just so well integrated to our society that it's used in pretty much all sort of popular music. It is used from anything to video games, movies, actual pop music, stuff like that, because even if it is a live instrument, if there is any sort of digital instrument at all, or anything in the production process, it's probably used by MIDI. Now, what I'd love to do right now is I'm going to give you guys more of a visual representation of what MIDI is and kind of what it looks like to look in music production software. Previously, we discussed how MIDI works by saving both the note value, aka what note it is, along with the velocity of the note played on a keyboard. And now I just kind of want to give a demonstration of what that looks like. Now this was me just kind of messing around with a blue scale here, but as you can see, this is where all of the notes end up being saved, all the individual notes. You can see the piano roll right here, and then this is actually where all the velocities are saved down here. And as you can see, I try to, play softer for the first bit of it and then play a little harder for the second bit, just kind of add a crescendo in there. And what's kind of neat about this is you can switch to whatever instrument you need in order to maybe get a certain sound you want, but let's say you play all the right notes that you want and everything, but you don't quite have the sound. This isn't saved as an audio file. This is saved as purely those note files. So I can switch to whatever instrument I want. And all of the instruments I have available in this library over here are available to play in any MIDI that I happen to compose. Now there are many problems with MIDI 1.0, despite the fact that it has withheld the test of time. First of all, technology has gone a long way since the 80s, and we are able to transfer information so much more quickly. And MIDI 1.0 is known for its latency and not allowing for someone to play a note on the MIDI instrument and allow it to actually appear on the screen at the exact time that they played it, which makes live performance with MIDI hard and difficult and frustrating. And not to mention that it still sounds robotic. Having 0 to 127 values for velocity simply isn't enough to make it sound like a fluid performance, make it sound more human than robotic and digital. And not to mention that it has a complicated setup, making MIDI very impossible for those of us who are more amateur musicians, who are not really sure how to set up everything properly, because there's a fairly extensive MIDI setup process between just setting up a keyboard and to a computer. You have to make sure every knob is calibrated properly. You have to set up everything correctly, and it's a complicated setup. And not only that, but it doesn't allow for creativity. You are given these note values, and you are told that you have to use only these note values and this velocity. And you don't have creativity with what sort of MIDI instruments you can create. So I just feel like an upgrade is definitely in order. Luckily, the MIDI Association is currently in development of MIDI 2.0, and they plan to fix all of the problems with MIDI 1.0 and do a little more. However, MIDI 2.0 is in need of support. You see, this update isn't something where just all of the MIDI devices in the world can just connect to Wi-Fi and then just update to MIDI 2.0 and make everything better. That is not how that works necessarily. You see, MIDI 2.0 instead needs to be updated slowly over time, allowing for updates in all of the production software and also all of the MIDI devices themselves. Now, let's talk a little bit about what is possible with MIDI 2.0. And unfortunately, I can't demonstrate as I don't have a prototype on hand. However, the MIDI Association did post everything that is going to change with MIDI 2.0 for development purposes. So let's talk about that. Now, MIDI 2.0's improvements, and the biggest one in my opinion, is simply more expression. With the power of data transfer nowadays as opposed to the 80s, you have a lot more expression. You have values that range from 0 to 65,000 pretty much. And you have all of this different articulation data that this all makes it so you can choose whatever note you want. It doesn't need to be just one of the 12 notes between A and G. You can choose to articulate notes differently. It isn't just set on velocity. And that velocity was there before is now a number that is set between 0 and 65,000, making everything a lot more expressive when you play music. You're not slotted into just one of those 0 and 127 values from before. Also, another thing is going to be bidirectional communication. Now, kind of as you can see on the right, there's something called MIDI CL, and this stands for MIDI Capability Inquiry. And what this is the communication between the two devices and allows for the MIDI device to kind of tell the production software what it's capable of, what notes it has, how many faders it has, what kind of drum pads it has, and everything that is really necessary in a MIDI device, and making it so you don't need to manually set that up every time you boot up a software. And now this makes more intuitive music making between devices and allows for musicians without much tech experience to more easily go ahead and set up their MIDI device and not make it as intimidating as it was before. This also allows for these things called timestamps. Timestamps pretty much are a communication from the MIDI device, saving the time that the note was played over to the production software, essentially allowing for there being no more latency. No more latency at all. Like when you play a note, it will be saved to the exact right position on your MIDI device, making it so you don't manually need to shift your notes around and everything. One last thing I want to talk about is backwards compatibility. Between the bidirectional communication between the MIDI device and the production software, you can see that pretty much if anything is not supported on the MIDI device, it defaults to MIDI 1.0 defaults, meaning that you are not losing anything when upgrading to MIDI 2.0, and in fact, your MIDI 1.0 devices are still going to stay there as long as you have them, and your software will just default to MIDI 1.0 instead. Finally, I'd like to talk about how MIDI 2.0 has the capability to put creativity back in music and put more creativity towards the production of new types of musical instruments. It's something that isn't really talked about, but Music 2.0 kind of has this capability of pretty much making it so you can do whatever you want with a piece of MIDI technology and a MIDI interface and be able to upload it to your computer and have it output the right notes for you. This could do anything to having something that looks like a theremin being digitalized into something that can actually be a MIDI device. And this just allows for so much more creativity with music, and it really just allows for so many more opportunities for musicians, for music producers, and for everyone to be able to kind of put their own spin onto what music is and how to interface with music. And overall, it allows for music to become more beautiful and turn it more into what the musicians dream that it can be. And I think it's really cool.